We need to talk about mining cartels, the availability of ASICs for specific miners, and the way they utilize a monopoly on the mining hardware themselves to go ahead and manipulate the price of different types of cryptocurrencies, especially smaller ones. Let's get into it. So this video topic is inspired by a recent change by the cryptocurrency or the blockchain known as Decred. Now, Decred has been basically ASIC mineable for quite some time now, and what was happening was a manipulation of the supply by the miners that had control of the network completely to basically press the price in the directions that they desired. Now, Decred tried to make a few different changes to take care of this. One being first to change the actual supply or the payout that was the subsidy split between proof of work and proof of stake. This was originally done in DCP 0010. And the abstract here is that the modifications to block reward subsidy split such that the 10% goes to proof of work and 80% goes to proof of stake. The treasury subsidy remains at 10%. This proposal is motivated by an extensive analysis that shows the majority of proof of work hash power is highly centralized and being used to maliciously manipulate Decred markets. The proposed modification to the subsidy split is intended to substantially diminish the ability to attack Decred's markets with mined coins and improve decentralization of the issuance process. Now, unfortunately, what happens here is what? Well, all of the miners that were manipulating the markets had a majority of the supply. So what do? They spin up the proof of stake nodes and maintain control. That is obviously the attack vector here on the markets, and taking control of that and being able to manipulate that. So another change has been made too, and this was for DCP 0011, and this was to change proof of work to Blake 3 and essentially kick ASICs off of the network. And it goes on to say that this specifies modifications to the Decred proof of work requirements as follows: separate the block hash from the proof of work hash, switch to Blake 3 hashing algorithm for proof of work, reset the required target difficulty for mining upon activation, and change to a more responsive difficulty adjustment algorithm named Assert. Now, obviously, changing the difficulty adjustment here is going to be important as well. We've seen difficulty adjustment failures bite a lot of blockchains in the butt, most recently or most notable being Ergo, of course. So we'll have to see if this was, done properly. That can be a difficult thing to put into place. The motivation, of course, is the result of continued analysis after previous subsidy split change made by DCP 0010, which we already covered, which shows that the majority of the proof of work hash power continues to be highly centralized and controlled by a mining cartel. The proposed change to the Blake 3 hashing algorithm is intended to break up the aforementioned mining cartel and further improve decentralization of the issuance process by making the specialized mining hardware, ASICs in this case, that enable the centralization obsolete. So what are we seeing when we are talking about getting rid of centralization? In particular, we're talking about going the direction of getting rid of ASICs. Now, this is really interesting because a majority of new coins that have been coming out that have not been around for a long time have been pushing towards ASICs. And what we see in that particular sphere is kind of a monopoly from the hardware manufacturing side on these ASICs. Maybe one company, in some cases like Caspa, we ended up with two companies, but at lower quantities. The problem here too, of course, being in the case of Caspa, for example, is that we have a high entry point. So you have large capital coming in, purchasing the ASICs, and then being able to manipulate the price because you only have a few machines in the hands of a few people, right? And the rest of the machines are obsolete. And at this point, it can cause a ton of problems. And if we're kind of pushing still for that decentralization, you want to move away from that. We've seen now as well, Ironfish start to move away. But interestingly enough, and this is where I think Decred may have made made a mistake personally is that when we look at Ironfish, for example, they're moving off of Blake 3 because of the FPGA and the future ASICs that are going to be able to be mining the Blake 3 algorithm. So it was kind of curious that Decred moved to Blake 3. The argument was, of course, that there aren't any current ASICs for Blake 3, but we do know that there are definitely FPGAs available. And if you guys are familiar with the FPGA market, there definitely are quite a bit of a mining cartel surrounding FPGAs because of the availability. That has gotten a lot better in recent times, but it's still quite a bit of a problem where most of the FPGAs are controlled by a couple large FPGA farms, and they can utilize that to suck up a bunch of the supply and then manipulate the price because they control the supply. And this is a problem that happens with any specialized hardware, ASICs included. So while I do think that moving for Decred over to Blake 3 is definitely better than where they were at, which was just basically an ASIC farm that controlled the entire supply of the market, at the end of the day, I think that Blake 3 should be maybe reconsidered in this particular case. As it sits now, though, if you're interested in mining Decred, it was CPU only for a little while, and I did do a node guide over on my locals page, which I will leave linked down below if you want to get into mining it with a CPU. You will need to build the node, though, to 4 GPUs, and that being said, of course, what we have discovered here is that there has been a release just a few days ago on or for a Go miner specifically for GPU mining. This will specifically require that you have an RPC server with a node to actually mine to. As I can tell so far, there aren't any stratums, there's no mining pools or anything like that, so you can get in early on mining yourself some Decred if you have the wherewithal to go through all of the tutorials and such. I will be trying to get those tutorials in video form for you guys as well. And when those are launched, of course, just make sure you're subscribed to the channel for all of that. This is really telling though, because this project has been around for quite a while. And we have seen a lot of different cryptocurrencies start to follow this path. Kadena, for example, is one that recently started following this path. And it brings into question for me, basically, if we might see the same kind of price manipulation for things like Kadena, for things like Kaspa, and so on, for things like Nexa as Nexa moves to ASICs, for things like Radiant as Radiant moves to ASICs, because remember, we just announced, of course, that you can now mine Radiant with FPGAs and the E300, and ASICs are probably on the way for that coin as well. Will there be a push to move back towards basically decentralization of mining power, mining hardware, that sort of thing? Or will we continue down this path of just basically having a bunch of different little altcoins being controlled completely by single farms that had the capital to invest in them? That's kind of the question I have. And then do you want to invest in a project where a majority of the supply is going to a single user that can then in turn have complete control of the market? Is that really where we want to head with cryptocurrency in general? I think not. And I know that surrounding the touchy subject of Kaspa, that a lot of people have different arguments surrounding that, but the fact of the matter is Kaspa is nowhere near Bitcoin for the ASIC side of things. And I think for ASICs to really make sense, they have to be a very large network with a ton of different competitors within that market to make it worth it. Thanks for watching today. I'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. You guys know that I hold GPU mining near and dear to my heart, so I definitely still think that ASIC resistance is important, and I will continue to stand on my soapbox and tell you guys that I believe that it is important to have basically ASIC resistance, because otherwise we end up in this kind of weird place where just a few people control the networks and control the supply. And I think that that is bad for any blockchain project as a whole. And it's clear here that also when they tried the proof of stake reordering for Decred, that did not solve the problem. So proof of stake was not the answer here either. I think the only answer at the end of the day is to utilize consumer grade products that have consumer access for the public. Otherwise, you just end up with a cryptocurrency that can be highly manipulated. Thanks for watching. I will see you next Tuesday. Don't forget to check out my locals page at sonofatech.locals.com, where I do post guides and how-tos for nodes. These are articles. I also post my daily moves over there. And if you would like a free month of locals, you can get that with a purchase of my crypto mining e-course at sonofatech.com.